Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a plunge into a really pivotal and, at times, quite dramatic chapter in India's economic story, the Special Economic Zones, or SEZs. To kick things off, maybe let's go back to March 14, 2007, Nandigram, West Bengal. Police opened fire on villagers protesting a planned SEZ there.
Yeah, a really shocking incident.
14 villagers were killed in clashes with the police. It just ignited this huge wave of public outrage across India.
And the project was, well, it was scrapped almost immediately afterwards, a huge fallout.
So what exactly were these villagers protesting? These SEZs, at their core, they're described as duty-free enclaves, right?
Exactly. Essentially treated as foreign territory for trade operations, even though they're inside India.
And the goal is attract investment, create jobs.
Offer firms a whole package of benefits, regulatory breaks, better infrastructure, tax advantages.
Right. Now, you shared sources with us that really get into India's SEZ policy, and I think what we want to explore today is this real tension, isn't it, between public purpose and private property.
That's the heart of it, especially in India's push for economic growth. It's a constant balancing act.
Okay, so to really get why India bet so heavily on SEZs, we probably need to rewind a bit to the economy before 1991.
Oh, absolutely. The infamous license Raj.
Yeah, you hear that term a lot. Describe it for us.
Well, imagine trying to start any business. You needed countless licenses, permits, navigating this incredibly complex, slow bureaucracy.
And corrupt, apparently.
Notoriously so. It just stifled growth. We're talking maybe 3.5% annual growth back then. Really sluggish.
And the government's hand was everywhere. Heavy regulation.
So heavy that big names like Mobil Oil, Coca-Cola, IBM, they were actually forced out of India.
Because of things like FARA, the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act.
Precisely. FARA was very restrictive. Indian companies themselves faced huge tax burdens, needed government permission for almost everything, expanding, hiring, firing.
It sounds almost impossible to operate, like doing business with one hand tied behind your back.
It really was. You wonder how anything got done, frankly.
So that environment, clearly it couldn't last. What was the breaking point?
1991, a major balance of payments crisis. India was basically running out of foreign currency.
A real crisis moment.
Absolutely pivotal. It forced the government's hand, leading to sweeping economic liberalization reforms, spearheaded by Manmohan Singh, who was finance minister then.
And the core idea was moving away from central planning.
Exactly. They dismantled large parts of the industrial licensing system, opened up sectors to private companies that were previously closed off.
And started integrating India more into the global economy.
Right, abolishing import licensing, slashing import duties, making it easier for foreign companies to invest, lifting many FDI restrictions. It was a complete reversal, really, from decades of looking inward.
And the results, I mean, the numbers are pretty staggering, aren't they?
They really are. Investment just took off, went from about 24% of GDP in 1990 up to 37% by 2007.
And growth rates.
Accelerated dramatically. By 2005, India was hitting over 9% growth per year.
Incredible. And poverty levels.
Significantly down, from 36% below the poverty line in 93 to around 27.5% by 2005. Real progress.
And the whole structure of the economy shifted too, right? Less agriculture, more services.
Definitely. The software industry in particular just exploded onto the global scene.
And Indian companies started making waves internationally. You mentioned Tata Steel buying Chorus.
Tata Motors launching the Nano, the world's cheapest car, and then buying Jaguar and Land Rover from Ford. Indian firms became genuine global players.
But you pointed out this paradox. Despite all that success, there were still big underlying worries, right?
Yes. Quite a few concerns about whether this growth model was really sustainable in the long run. The questions started popping up. Was India growing despite government policy, not because of it?
Interesting. What were the main criticisms?
Well, one major one was the neglect of agriculture. Reforms focused heavily on trade and industry, but agriculture, which still employed maybe 60% of the workforce,
Got left behind.
Largely, yes. You had these archaic laws still on the books, like the Essential Commodities Act from 1955, which actually hampered farmers, ironically.
Which led to farmer discontent. You mentioned the 2004 elections reflecting that.
Exactly. There was a sense that the benefits weren't reaching everyone. Even when policies became more farmer-friendly after 2006, yields didn't really pick up much.
And manufacturing, that didn't boom quite like services.
No, its share of GDP barely budged. It was held back by Well, notoriously restrictive labor laws and really tough competition, especially from China.
Creating this weird situation of skill shortages in some areas.
And a lack of jobs for unskilled workers trying to leave farming. You saw this in places like Maharashtra. They needed skilled workers, but had high unemployment among the low-skilled.
And broader economic weaknesses persisted, like the fiscal deficit.
Right, the deficit remained high, and FDI, while growing, wasn't matching levels seen in, say, China or Brazil.
So Fareed Zakaria's description of India's growth as messy, chaotic, and largely unplanned, bottom up, seems quite apt then.
I think it captures it well. Entrepreneurs kind of finding ways around the obstacles rather than being helped by a smooth system.
Okay, so that's the context. Impressive growth, but with these deep structural issues still bubbling under the surface.
Precisely.
And into this picture come the special economic zones, pitched as a kind of golden solution.
You could say that. Kamal Nath, the commerce minister, called them a golden milestone. Business leaders like Sunil Munjal from Hero Group thought it was an absolutely brilliant idea.
The hope was they'd attract that stable, long-term investment and create those desperately needed jobs.
That was the core vision, yes. A way to kind of leapfrog some of the existing problems.
Now, let's zoom out for a second. SEZs aren't just an Indian thing, are they?
Oh, no, not at all. They're global. Broadly, these specifically delineated duty-free enclaves treated as foreign territory for trade.
And it covers different types. Free trade zones, export processing zones.
Free ports, even things like urban enterprise zones. It's a broad category.
And they've been around for a while.
The concept goes way back, actually. Early versions in Argentina, Uruguay in the 1920s, but they really took off globally in the late 60s, early 70s.
And the basic goals are usually similar. Competitive environment for exports, boost manufacturing, create jobs.
Pretty much, yes. Offer a space relatively free from the usual red tape.
Okay, but here's where it gets interesting. The global track record is pretty mixed, isn't it?
Very mixed. You have places often cited as successes. Hong Kong, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan used them effectively from the mid-60s.
Right. You mentioned their zones contributed 7% of exports by 1980, and even in the U.S., those New Jersey zones creating jobs and investment.
True. But then you have the failures. Places like the Dominican Republic, Egypt, Ghana, Senegal, where the SEZs just became isolated islands, didn't integrate, maybe even cost the government money.
And then there's China, often held up as the biggest success story.
Almost always, yes. After the revolution, land was state-owned, but in the 80s, special rules allowed land leasing in SEZs like Shenzhen.
So they became these sort of experimental zones for capitalism.
Exactly. Minimal government interference, big tax breaks, and the results were, well, staggering. GDP and exports growing 10–11% annually in the 80s.
By the 2000s, these zones were pulling in a huge chunk of foreign investment.
By 2004, 54 national SEZs accounted for something like 22% of all FDI into China. Huge numbers.
But even in China, it wasn't all positive, right? There were downsides.
Absolutely critical downsides. Concerns were raised early on about harsh working conditions, terrible pollution levels, rising crime rates in these boom zones.
So that growth at all costs approach has a serious human and environmental price tag.
A very heavy one. It's a crucial trade-off to remember. And you also had international trade rules to consider, like from the WTO, about export subsidies. SEZs generally comply if the perks aren't tied only to exporting.
Okay, so back to India. They actually had experience with similar zones before the 2005 Act, right? EPZs.
Yes. India had Asia's very first export processing zone in Kandla, way back in 1965.
But the SEZ Act of 2005 was a major step up from those EPZs.
A big step up. Allowed for a much larger scale, a broader industrial base, and significantly more relaxed rules than the old EPZ policy. It was much more ambitious. And the government laid out multiple objectives for these new SEZs.
More than just export.
Oh, yes. Promoting exports was key, but also boosting domestic and foreign investment, creating jobs, developing infrastructure, and interestingly, using India's large tracts of uncultivable lands.
Uncultivable land? How much are we talking?
A surprising amount, something like 45.5% of India's total land area falls into that category, so the idea was to put some of that to productive use.
And the incentives offered under the 2005 Act were pretty generous.
Very attractive. Duty-free import of materials, a 100% income tax break on export profits for the first 5 years.
Then 50% for the next 10 years.
Right. Plus exemptions from service tax, central sales tax, state sales taxes, and often states throw in extras like stamp duty waivers on land deals. A very sweet package.
It really sounds like they were trying to create these separate economic bubbles, almost like a different country within India for businesses.
That's a good way to put it. High-speed lanes, bypassing the usual roadblocks.
You mentioned the single window clearance, getting all approvals in one place.
Yeah, for environmental permits, construction, employment rules,
Yeah.
meant to cut through the red tape. And customs was simplified too, with self-declaration.
And Indian banks could set up offshore units inside the SEZs.
Yes, exempt from domestic banking rules, giving them easier access to international finance.
But that whole foreign territory idea, treating goods moving between an SEZ and the rest of India as exports or imports, that raised concerns too. Smuggling.
It did. That designation was key for the customs benefits, but it definitely opened up possibilities for misuse. Yeah. Smuggling was a worry.
And labor laws, were they different inside SEZs?
Mostly the same restrictive Indian labor laws applied, needing government permission to lay off workers if you employ over 100 people.
Still quite restricted then.
Very. But there was one key difference. Workers in SEZs had to give 30 days notice before striking. Elsewhere, strikes could happen much more suddenly, so a bit more stability for businesses in that regard.
And setting one up was a multi-stage process.
Okay.
Approval, notification.
Yeah, in-principle approval, then formal approval, then final notification after checks. The Commerce Ministry also set up these open houses.
Open houses. What were they?
Basically, forums for officials and companies to meet, troubleshoot problems. Anita Arjundas from Mahindra World City, SEZ, mentioned they were actually quite useful for sorting out smaller issues quickly.
And the scale of this whole thing by, say, 2008? It was massive.
Absolutely huge. Hundreds of zones approved in principle or formally, 136 in principle, 453 formally approved, 207 actually notified and running by March 2008.
And the land involved.
Enormous. Just the formally approved ones needed about 642 square kilometers.
Wow. Was development spread evenly across India?
Not really. Heavily concentrated in the south, west, and north, where industry was already stronger. The eastern states lagged behind quite a bit.
But they were creating jobs.
Definitely. Over 336,000 direct jobs by then, plus maybe another 220,000 indirect jobs in construction and support services.
And investment was flowing in.
Around $17 billion in private investment had come in. And exports from SEZs had jumped massively, a 381% increase between 2003 and 2008.
Those numbers are huge. It really shows the scale of the national push behind this.
It was a massive bet, no doubt.
Okay, so that's the big picture, but let's zoom in on a specific case. You mentioned Mahindra World City in Tamil Nadu as a success story.
Yes, near Chennai. India's first operational multi-sector SEZ, about 1,500 acres. IT, auto parts, apparel.
What made it work well?
They were very effective at cutting through the usual hassles for companies, reducing regulatory delays, ensuring infrastructure like power was reliable.
Like that example of Mill A getting subsidiary approval in 2 months instead of 9.
Exactly, and getting reliable power from the Tamil Nadu Electricity Board, that's a huge plus in India.
And the tax breaks were a major draw. You mentioned Nastronics choosing India over Thailand because of them.
Absolutely. The tax incentives were key for Nastronics, and they also really liked the streamlined self-declaration customs process. It seems being in an SEZ gave firms a bit more trust from the government, smoother operations.
But even Mahindra World City wasn't perfect, right? They still faced challenges.
Oh, sure. Hiring top people was tough, partly because of the long commute from Chennai, 90 minutes or so.
And the labor law paperwork was still burdensome.
Yeah, compliance still required a lot of detailed record keeping. And some companies had issues with congestion and customs delays at Chennai Airport.
But those open houses you mentioned earlier actually helped solve problems.
They did seem effective. Like when Nastronics raised their airport issues, the Commerce Ministry Secretary apparently stepped in personally after an open house meeting to get things sorted.
So there was a feedback loop, a way to fix things.
Exactly. And crucially, for Mahindra's success, especially with land, 2 things stand out.
Okay.
First, they'd acquired a lot of the land before the 2005 SEZ Act even came in, a process that took them over 4 years itself.
So they got ahead of the curve on the land issue.
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
And second, their whole mindset was different. They saw it as a long-term infrastructure business, not a quick real estate flip.
Expecting profits over 10, 12 years, not 2, 3.
Right. They actually broke even in 2008, 8 years after starting, and they replicated this model later in Jaipur, again with strong state government help. And importantly, they bought extra land specifically to relocate people displaced by the project.
That seems proactive, addressing the social side early on.
It does suggest learning from potential pitfalls.
Which brings us right back to the core issue, the one that started Nandigram: land acquisition.
The central conflict.
India's constitution protects private property, right? Saved by authority of law.
Yes, there's a constitutional protection and an active private land market managed by state governments.
But for huge projects like SEZs, buying land privately must be incredibly complicated.
Extremely difficult. Developers ran into major hurdles. Land holdings are often small, fragmented.
Meaning you have to negotiate with tons of individual owners.
Exactly, and then you get the holdout problem. As soon as word gets out a big company is buying, some owners demand exorbitant prices.
Like the Tata Metallics plants being delayed 3 years and costs jumping 150% because they couldn't get the last bit of land.
A classic example. And companies worried about their reputation if the brokers they used got too aggressive. Many developers started feeling they needed the government to step in.
And this fueled that perception of SEZs becoming land scams.
That concern became widespread, yes. Critics like Rahul Bajaj argued middlemen were buying land cheap, getting it designated as SEZ land, then selling it on at vastly inflated prices.
Making huge profits without adding much value.
That was the accusation. Lawyer Valol Kaladkar said the middlemen made the lion's share of the profit.
And it destroyed public trust. That quote from the activist Jenna Bai is powerful. As far as we understand, the government and company are one. We have no faith.
It really captures that deep sense of alienation and mistrust that built up.
Now, the government did have a tool. Eminent domain. The Land Acquisition Act of 1894.
Right. The power to take private land for public purpose with just compensation.
This sounds familiar. Like the Takings Clause in the U.S. Constitution.
Very similar concept. And the debates are global. Look at the Kelo v. City of New London case in the U.S. Supreme Court in 2005.
That was the one where they ruled economic development could be of public use.
In a very controversial 5-4 decision, yes. Justice Stevens argued promoting economic development was a traditional government function.
But Justice O'Connor dissented strongly,
Right.
Saying it basically meant any private benefit could justify taking land.
Exactly. She argued it stretched public use too far. The ruling caused a huge backlash in the U.S., and many states actually passed laws afterwards to restrict eminent domain for private development.
So back in India, the definitions of public purpose and just compensation were also constantly debated.
Hugely controversial. The original 1894 Act didn't even allow taking land for companies. But a 1984 amendment broadened public purpose to include things like export projects, investment, infrastructure.
Which led to more disputes like the Narmada Dam protests.
Precisely. The Narmada Bachao Andolan started in 85, fighting against dam projects where people felt the public purpose didn't justify their displacement and compensation wasn't fair.
And just compensation itself. It wasn't always market rate.
Often not. Because, as one official pointed out, people historically underdeclared the actual sale price of land to avoid taxes and stamp duty.
So the government's compensation was based on those artificially low, officially recorded prices.
Largely, yes. Often way below the real market value. Plus, farmers often had issues proving ownership of inherited land, and the whole process could be incredibly rushed, sometimes only 48 hours notice to respond.
And beyond the money, there is the emotional connection, the loss of livelihood.
Absolutely critical point. As economist Subir Gokar noted, market price often doesn't capture the full loss. For many farmers, land is everything, their identity, their security.
Like the farmer who said, "We know only farm work." If you take their land, what are they supposed to do? Especially if they don't have skills for SEZ jobs.
It's the crux of the problem, a fundamental disconnect between economic logic and human reality.
Which takes us back to Nandigram and then to Singur, another key flashpoint.
Singur, West Bengal, where Tata Motors planned to build its nano factory, a huge $300 million project.
And the state government acquired nearly 1,000 acres of fertile farmland using eminent domain.
Yes, 997 acres of multi-crop land.
But it sparked massive protests, led by Mamata Banerjee.
Huge protests. Allegations that almost 400 acres were taken illegally without proper compensation. Banerjee went on a 25-day hunger strike, really bringing national focus to it.
And the compensation offered, it didn't match the rise in land values.
That was a major point of contention. The state offered market rates at the time, maybe $17,000, $24,000 an acre. But once Tata came in, industrial land prices nearby shot up to maybe $80,000 an acre.
The farmers felt cheated.
Deeply resentful, yes. It seemed fundamentally unfair.
And the situation just ground to a halt. Tata couldn't proceed.
It became an impasse. The land needed for Tata's suppliers was scattered, which threatened the whole low-cost model of the Nano. Their suppliers had already sunk $110 million into it.
And Ratan Tata eventually said they'd pull out.
He made it very clear. If anybody is under the impression that because we have made this large investment, we will not move, then they are wrong. Strong words.
And they did leave. October 2008.
Yes, citing the environment of confrontation, agitation, and violence, a major setback for West Bengal.
But Tata quickly found a new home for the nano plant in Gujarat.
They did. Gujarat offered similar incentives, provided 1,100 acres in Sanand for about $7,000 an acre.
And Tata praised Gujarat's conducive and industry-friendly environment.
He did. It really highlighted how important political stability and a predictable environment are for big investments.
But even in Gujarat, the land issue didn't completely disappear. Farmers there also filed cases.
That's right. In December 2008, farmers in Sanand also alleged forcible acquisition. It just underscored how deep-rooted and widespread this problem was across India. Tata must have wondered if they'd face the same thing all over again.
So with all this turmoil, Nandigram, Singher, ongoing disputes, the government tried to reform the land acquisition law itself, the 2007 Amendment Bill.
Yes, an attempt to fix the 1894 Act. It tried to clarify things.
How? By broadening public purpose even more.
It did broaden it to include strategic projects, defense, infrastructure, anything useful to the general public. And controversially, it allowed the government to step in and acquire the last 30% of land for a project if the developer had already bought 70% privately.
Trying to solve that holdout problem.
But that was the idea. It also had provisions for compensating everyone dependent on the land, not just owners like laborers, tribal communities,
Right.
and mandated quicker payments, social impact assessments for big projects, and new courts for faster dispute resolution.
Sounds like it addressed some key complaints. But it still faced opposition.
Oh yes, very mixed reactions. Supporters hoped it would bring clarity and prevent future Singhers. But opponents, like Jayant Sinha, called it deeply flawed.
Why flawed?
Criticisms included a lack of overall land use planning and continued vagueness around just compensation. A key parliamentary committee report in late 2008 was quite critical.
What did the committee say?
They were wary of expanding eminent domain, arguing public purpose was still too vague and open to misuse. They also questioned the fairness and cost-effectiveness of the government buying the last 30% of land, potentially at inflated prices.
So the bill faced difficulties getting passed.
It got bogged down. It highlighted just how complex and politically sensitive these issues were. Even trying to reform the law was incredibly difficult.
So given all these struggles with eminent domain and protests, are there examples where land acquisition actually worked well without conflict?
There are some. The Cochin International Airport in Kerala is often cited.
What happened there?
They needed 1,300 acres from about 2,300 farmers. But instead of just using eminent domain, they engaged in detailed negotiations involving everyone, the state, local leaders, the developers, the landowners.
And they came up with a comprehensive package.
Very comprehensive. It wasn't just cash. It included alternative land, financial compensation, shares in the airport company itself, a free air ticket.
And even a job guarantee for one family member?
Yes, a job for someone in each displaced family. It was a much more holistic approach to rehabilitation.
And the airport got built and became successful.
Absolutely. Opened in 1999, became India's fourth largest international airport, known for being efficient. It shows that negotiated participatory approaches can work, though they might take more time and effort up front.
So wrapping this up, it feels like the story of SEZs in India really throws this fundamental tension into sharp relief, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The drive for rapid economic growth, for global competitiveness.
Colliding head-on with these incredibly complex issues of land, property rights, and fairness for ordinary citizens.
It's the classic development dilemma. How do you industrialize, create jobs, lift people out of poverty?
Without causing new injustices, without harming vulnerable people, without destroying livelihoods and communities in the process.
It's a profound challenge, and the SEZ experience in India, both the successes and the failures, offers really crucial, sometimes painful lessons.
So a final thought for our listeners to mull over. As you think about these stories, Nandigram, Singher, Mahindra World City, Cochin Airport, maybe consider, How can nations strike that balance?
Between the undeniable need for growth and investment and the fundamental rights and well-being of their people, especially when something as emotive and essential as land is involved.
What kind of development truly serves the common good in the long run, and how do we get there?